Keir Starmer. The answer to the question, what would you get if Jeff Goldblum's The Fly happened, but instead of the handsome and charming Gold Jeff Bloom and a fly, you had a particularly bland politician and a piece of stale, laxative-infused gluten-free Weetabix. He's a former socialist, a former director of public prosecutions, and a current ham-faced, soulless prime minister with all the warmth and charm of a weeping hemorrhoid on a chunk of roadkill. Today, we're going to talk about Keir Starmer, where he came from, and what in the sweet, ever-loving fucking shag he's doing to the country to make the population think that Nigel Farage might actually, by comparison, have a bit of a decent crack at it. Let's get started. Keir Starmer was assembled in Southwark, South London in 1962. His mum was a nurse, and his dad, well, nobody really knows what his dad did. He grew up in a pretty normal working-class household, but Keir was a very smart cookie. He earned a spot at Reigate Grammar School, a private school in, Reigate. He then studied law at the University of Leeds in Leeds, and then a postgraduate civil law degree from Oxford University in Oxford. And Keir wasn't apolitical back then either. His mother suffered from a debilitating illness that showed him the value of the NHS and a socialised healthcare model. As a result, he was a member of the Labour Party Young Socialists as a teen and joined the University Labour Club when he was at Leeds. This next bit, though, is where Keir really gets to separate himself from the majority of political leaders we see today, because after uni, he decided to get a job. A job, a real job, a non-political, real job. Matt. He went to work as a barrister, focusing predominantly on human rights, and was so good at it that at the tender age of 39 he was appointed to the Queen's Council. This career progression did not come at the cost of his progressive politics either. He was a vocal critic of the Iraq War, notably providing legal defence for one of the Fairford Five, a group of 5 people that broke into RAF Fairford and disabled equipment in order to disrupt the Iraq War effort. An interesting choice of examples that I'm sure won't be relevant later. Back then, Keir was unapologetically left-wing. If you look at it in context, Thatcher had just got done passing around the collective working class like a fleshlight at a Diddy party, and Parliament was still dominated by Thatcherite conservatism. Starmer, who was a vocal critic of both the royal family and privatisation and was even sceptical about the role of police, felt like he was morally obligated to fight against it in the only way he could: the courts. Whether it meant giving free legal representation to people fighting corporate lawsuits, to representing trade unions in court, it's clear that he was as much an idealist as he was a pragmatist. And look, if you're not a massive fan of his recent work, I get it, trust me, we will get there. It's important to note that if you're a citizen that values the law, Keir contributed massively to the country in a really meaningful way. He was a high-functioning legal professional that championed progressive values and had an actual, real-world impact. My issue with him isn't so much that he inherently is a bad person and always has been. It's that he was such a great example of what we need more of in this country until he entered politics. As a result of this near-universal esteem, he was appointed as the Director of Public Prosecutions, or DPP, in 2008. The DPP is the head of the Crown Prosecution Service, or CPS. The CPS is a separate entity to the police and government, and it's responsible for prosecuting criminal cases. Their role is to review evidence presented and decide whether or not to prosecute them based on a number of tests. Things like, is it in the public interest to prosecute the crime, or is there enough evidence to realistically win the lawsuit? Being the head of the CPS is a big deal, and it brings with it a huge amount of responsibility. So what did he do? Well, according to the Labour website, he oversaw the first ever UK prosecution of Al-Qaeda. He was the guy that brought charges against the MPs involved in the expenses scandal back in the day. And he also launched what's called the Victims' Right to Review, which allowed victims and their families to challenge decisions made by the CPS to not charge suspects or to drop their cases. Again, this is a job he did with a high degree of professionalism and with a socially conscious outlook. To this day, you'd struggle to find any serious politician that would contest his record as DPP. He was top shag at the CPS for 5 years before he stepped down at the end of his term to focus on politics. It's reported that he made this move because he wanted to change things materially for more than just one person at a time. And so, in December 2014, he was selected to be the Labour candidate for Holborn and St Pancras. This is considered to be a Labour safe seat and had been held for the last 34 years by one single MP, Labour's former Secretary of State for Health, Frank Dobson. Keir won the seat in the 2015 general election with over 52% of the vote, and from the get-go was looked at as a heavy hitter in the Labour Party, with clear potential to be party leader. So here he is. Big Boy had barely managed to stick the kettle on before he was appointed to Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet as Shadow Immigration Minister. That lasted for about as long as it took for the fucking kettle to boil before he resigned his cabinet position in a swathe of resignation protests against Corbyn's leadership. Truth be told, this was a tumultuous time in British politics, but especially so for Labour. The country had just voted for Brexit, and Corbyn decided to put his unwavering dedication to the working class's living standards on hold for just long enough to avoid campaigning against the economic fisting we were signing ourselves up to. This criticism also came at a time where Corbyn's Labour Party was being accused of widespread anti-Semitism, and a majority of his own MPs were more than slightly miffed at his limp-dick approach to leadership. In what's now remembered as the world's least exciting mutiny, Hilary Benn led 23 of the 31 cabinet ministers to resign in protest of Corbyn's leadership, of which one was Keir. It was also followed by an MP ballot that, despite highlighting that over 80% of MPs wanted Corbyn to resign, it was about as legitimate as the bottle of ground-up tiger penis that I bought, that, if anything, is making it smaller and itchier. What were we talking about again? Oh, yes. So, couple the piss-poor attitude on Brexit and the fact that over the last year and a bit he'd shuffled more cabinets than the floor manager of an IKEA, a leadership election was eventually called. Jez then went on to win it, awkward, and he offered Keir a new spot on his newly reshuffled post-win cabinet as Shadow Secretary of State for exiting the European Union. Keir's time as Shadow Brexit Minister was spent in equal parts trying to mediate between Corbyn and May, country I love, and reining in the anti-Brexit Labour MPs that felt betrayed at Corbyn's lack of support for a second referendum. Fast forward to 2019, and after Boris Johnson couldn't get parliamentary approval for his Brexit withdrawal agreement, another general election was called. In short, Labour got smashed. In a choice between Boris Johnson's pledge to Brexit as bigly as possible, being pushed by every major media organisation in the UK, and Jeremy Corbyn's offer to negotiate Brexit as a pro-Brexit guy in charge of the anti-Brexit party full of anti-Brexit MPs that strongly dislike his leadership. The Tories won with a majority of 80 seats, and with the final nail in that coffin, Jeremy Corbyn announced that he was stepping down as leader of the Labour Party and a leadership contest would begin. There were a few decent names that popped up as prospective leaders, notably Rebecca Long-Bailey and Clive Lewis, which, in hindsight, fuck yes, feed me a Clive Lewis Labour Party. The clear leader by pretty much every metric, though, was a former DPP by the name of Keir Starmer. He campaigned on the 10 pledges on screen right now. Notable notes include increasing taxes on the top 5% of earners, reviewing all UK arms sales, and bringing rail, mail, energy and water back into public ownership. He positioned himself as the middle ground between Corbyn's idealism and Blair's executive talent to make a moral case for socialism. And while it wasn't quite the Corbynites' cup of tea, it was enough to do the trick for most of Labour. In April of 2020, he was elected as the new Labour Party leader with just over 56% of the vote. At the time, at least for me, this felt like a really good result. Keir had been quietly gaining influence within the party. He was relatively inexperienced in politics. He presented as somebody with a proven track record of support for progressive politics. It also felt like a move away from the never-ending EastEnders episode that was Jeremy Corbyn. Keir also had a history of championing socialist values. He campaigned on socialist values, and here he was, ready to get cracking. Over the course of the next couple of years, Keir would reshuffle his cabinet a few times while he was in opposition. Initially, this was just par for the course for a new leader, but it became apparent as the months went on that we were witnessing a purge of the left within the largest political party on the left. Just over 6 months after Keir became leader, Jeremy Corbyn had been suspended from the Labour Party. Chancellor John McDonnell made way for Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Health Secretary Diane Abbott became Health Secretary Wes Streeting. Foreign Secretary Emily Thornberry became Foreign Secretary David Lammy. Point being, for a bloke running on a platform of socialism, it wasn't very socialism-y, you know? But the issues didn't stop there. Remember the 10 pledges he made when he was running for leader? Well, it seemed like a day didn't go by without him going back on one thing or another. In 2023, he backed down from a pledge to end tax breaks for private school fees. He backed down from ending the two-child benefit cap. He backed down on his pledge for ending university tuition fees. And he backed down from his pledge to increase tax on the highest earners. And look, the best case interpretation of his position was that he was just adapting to the rapidly depreciating financial position we found ourselves in with the whole Brexit and COVID thing. But hear me out, it's also possible that he could have just been a bit of a cunt. At the end of the day, the question remained for both his supporters and detractors alike. If you believed in these things, and now you don't believe in these things, what is it that you actually believe? What is it that you're actually going to do differently? And to be honest, that's a question we still don't really have an answer to. 2024 was the next big year in politics, and Keir is catching more flack as it seems like he's strategically blocking Labour candidates from standing in the general election that might be deemed too far left or too hard to control. While Keir insisted that nothing had changed and that the party's selection process had been designed to ensure the highest calibre of candidate, there were undoubtedly examples of very promising candidates being inexplicably cast aside. Faiza Shaheen, for example, almost beat the former Tory leader Syrian Duncan Smith in the 2019 election. She resigned from the Labour Party after she was deselected in 2024, and a very winnable seat was held by the Tories. Obviously, this didn't change the fact that basically the entire country was frothing at the mouth to get rid of the Tories. Keir Starmer's Labour Party won the election and almost doubled their seats, with the Tories losing over 250 in what can only be described as a rogering of epic proportions. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, however, the fact that Labour managed to win this huge seat majority despite earning literally millions less votes than Corbyn got when he lost 59 seats in the 2019 election. You can see here that the Labour Party won about 63% of the seats with just under 34% of the popular vote. What that means is that, yes, Labour have all the power in the world right now, but it's built on a very, very shaky foundation that could be disastrous in 2029 if Keir doesn't deliver on the change people want to see. But hey, say what you like about Keir Starmer, he had a smart approach, he worked tactically to leverage our shitty voting system to his advantage, and finally brought about the end of the Tory regime. His brand of sensible centrism and complete lack of any discernible personality beyond "I support Arsenal, lol" beat the Tories, and we finally ended the age of austerity. We are ending the age of austerity, right? Okay, so I'm not going to lie to you. My belief coming into this new government was that all the language Keir had used to mediate between the centre-left and the centre-right throughout the campaign was essentially a bit of a fib, so he could gather as much of the moderate Tory vote as possible, get into office and make a big speech saying, "Hey, look guys, it doesn't take a fucking rocket surgeon to understand that our economy is set up in a way that redistributes money upwards. And what we want to do is start the process of redistributing money downwards, closing the wealth gap, and not continuing to finger blast the majority of the population in favour of multimillionaires and billionaires." Boom. Job done. The human rights socialist Harvey Birdman strikes again and saves the universe. What actually happened was, nothing, really. But, okay, he didn't quite carpe the diem, but who am I to judge? We've hung on for 14 years. Maybe he's just trying to let the dust settle a little bit before he puts up the Che Guevara posters. Just a few weeks later, before the cabinet ministers even got a chance to raid Nadine Dorries' coke stash, the sentient fringe known as Rachel Reeves announced that, following a public spending audit, the Tories had left a £22 billion black hole that was unreported and unaccounted for. While the former Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, being the massive humming, stinking, steaming shit cunt that he is, quibbled about the number, the fact of the matter is that the Tories had left a previously undisclosed deficit to the tune of several billions of pounds. Okay, so, right off the bat, we're about 20 billion quid up shit creek before we even got the calculator out, and we've got a left-wing human rights prime minister that apparently has had it up to here with the Tories and their bullshit, who campaigned on a platform of restoring dignity and humanity to the welfare system and vowed to increase taxes on the richest in society. Well, here we fucking go, lads. This is it. He's gonna slap his big, giant, fat socialist balls onto that stupid fucking table thing and say, guess what, fuckers? We're gonna have to tax every little cunt that has profited off the Tories and their bullshit until they're pipsqueak. The fiscal fucking rules, they're out the window. And if you don't like it, well, I'm the Prime Minister, so fuck off. And so, he decided that he would, obviously, as we all expected, cut welfare. That's right, our new left-wing government decided that in the face of a £22 billion deficit, we should spend a huge amount of political capital by limiting the winter fuel payment paid out to millions of pensioners in order to help heat their homes. Now, this was, especially looking back, the move that would set the tone for Keir's government over the next year. It showed the country that, when they were faced with the decision to tax the asset-holding billionaires that greatly profited from the government's COVID stimulus, or cut the already meagre subsistence of regular people, they chose to cut welfare. When push came to shove, Keir chose to continue austerity. And you might be thinking, but geez, at least they probably did an impact assessment, right? Carefully determined an appropriate income level to protect, then made cuts to those above it. No, they fucking didn't. When Keir was asked, he said that he didn't do it, and that it wasn't legally necessary to do an impact assessment before the plans were actioned. And to that, I say, yeah, it might not be legally necessary, but it's morally necessary, you fucking arsehole. Then we get to the budget. What was supposed to feel like an exciting turn in the right direction now felt like an anxiety-ridden wait while the collective arseholes of the working class did the old 5p, 50p dance. What we got was a mishmash of different policies that turned my big throbbing wealth tax boner into the kind of confusing semi-on that you get when you first see Two Girls, One Cup. £40 billion was being raised in taxes to fund the NHS and other public sector services that have otherwise been shafted. But over half of that cash is coming from an increase to employers' national insurance contributions. And they didn't raise income taxes, sure, but they also didn't raise the income tax bands. So working people are effectively paying more tax. So here's the predicament Keir is in. He's saying that he's on the side of the working class, but he didn't move up tax brackets, he increased bus by 50%, he means-tested the winter fuel payments, he kept the two-child benefit cap, and he's actively pushing, against his own party, to remove PIP. Then he says he's on the side of businesses, but his increase to employers' national insurance means steep increases to the costs of hiring employees and meant that we saw job losses in the six figures. Job losses, might I remind you, impact working people. It means the prospect of small businesses hiring employees drifted even further out of reach. And now I know what you're thinking, but don't worry, the MPs did get their pay rise. And look, I could be pragmatic. I understand that you can't have it all, and it's not like it was just another Tory budget, but what it did show was that Keir Starmer's Labour Party are nothing more than just the other side of the coin. Sure, they'll shift some taxes, 1% here, 1% there, but they're proving that they are unwilling to take bold action to fix the actual structure of the system that is failing working people. Now, I'll be honest, if it was just the budget, I probably wouldn't even be making this video. So now, let's take a look at all the other shit that made me give up on Keir Starmer's Labour Party. Around March this year, Rachel Reeves announced that they needed to review our country's fiscal situation and make some difficult choices. She announced that a land value tax is being introduced in order to raise funds for vital public services by appropriately taxing the richest in our society. Only joking, she's cutting welfare again. In a desperate effort to save £5 billion a year by 2030, Rach and Keir announced that they were cutting certain benefits because, God bless them, the system forces these poor, disabled people into a life on benefits. When the OBR came out and said that actually the cuts would only save about £3.4 billion and not £5 billion, Keir and Rach announced that they were making more welfare cuts to hit that £5 billion figure. Cool. Most of the cuts were being made to something called PIP, or Personal Independence Payments. These are welfare payments paid out to help people with various debilitating illnesses or injuries to help them pay for their everyday life. Keir's argument is that more people are claiming it, and that's just not on. Now, bear in mind, he could raise about 20 billion or so with a one-off wealth tax, or he could introduce a new land value tax, or he could cut the royal stipend, currently £132 million a year, not including the interest he earns from his many billions of pounds of private investments, or he could bring capital gains tax in line with income tax, or he could increase taxes on the banks that bankrupted us back in 2008. But I guess we'd rather stop Doris getting her meals on wheels than telling Rachel Reeves her fiscal rules are fucking shit. Here's my real issue, if it wasn't already apparent. We are being told that the changes need to be made because we are concerned that the service is being overutilised. Okay, great. I'm not against that argument in principle. But if that's your actual concern, why did they adjust the depth of the cuts when they were being told by the OBR that they weren't actually going to save £5 billion? Why did they continue to cut deeper rather than making up the deficit from somewhere else? The answer is that Keir doesn't really think that people are claiming benefits illegitimately on any grand scale. It's obvious that he started off with a target of cutting £5 billion from the welfare budget, regardless of the cost to the recipients that would be pushed into relative poverty, and everything else that he says about this is purely theatre. For the last few months, probably in response to him polling just slightly more popular than typhoid, Keir has begun to spin a narrative that, whether you like it or not, the choice at the next election is between him and Nigel Farage. And look, I get why he's doing this. It's obvious that Reform are polling well, and the last thing you'd want to do in his position is encourage people to split the vote against your party. Here's the issue. If that's the case, and your chief and primary concern is with making the country better and not letting it fall into the hands of Farage or your desperate cling to power, why don't you do something about it? He's the prime fucking minister, the leader of a party with 401 of the 650 parliamentary seats. If he wanted to, he could move the country from first past the post to proportional representation tomorrow. He isn't doing that because he knows that would mean each person's vote actually matters. And if each vote matters and the amount of seats a party gets is directly proportional to how many people voted for them, it would be game over for both Labour and the Conservatives, who rely on the 2.5 party system to maintain their power. And while we're on the subject of reform, Keir needs to chill the fuck out with making every speech and every question about Nigel fucking Farage. And it's not because I don't think he's somebody that we should be talking about, but the Prime Minister should be convincing us of his vision for the country. If you're a year into the job and your platform is basically, I know you think I'm a prick, but he's a bit more of a prick than I am, you are fucked. The reason Nigel Farage's politics is so popular right now is because he's appealing to all of the working class people that feel like they're being failed by the political establishment. After 14 years of Conservatives fucking them, you were given a chance. Now it looks like you're fucking them, so of course they're going to look elsewhere. If you're on the left, you're probably eyeing up the Greens, and if you've been kicked in the head by a horse, you're probably looking at reform. And it doesn't matter that Nigel's a career politician. It doesn't matter that he's spent less time in Clacton than I fucking have. It doesn't matter that he doesn't have any actual costed policies. It doesn't matter that he's in Russia's pocket. It doesn't matter that he went to America to try to convince them to sanction his own country. It doesn't matter that he is recorded on camera saying that he thinks the NHS should be replaced with a private insurance-based system, because he appeals to the people who don't have a fucking clue what any of that means. And even if they do, they care more about deporting Muslims. The best thing can do to tackle reform is to have a positive vision of the country that actually helps normal people. He needs to make their lives better, and he needs to make sure that he consistently communicates the good things that he is doing so people actually know that it's his leadership that is making that happen. He won't, though, because he's as deep in the pocket of vested interests as the Tories. The next election will almost certainly be a battle of the populists, and Keir has done as much to aid that as Farage himself. Now, Keir has pretty consistently caught flack for his support for Israel as the leader of the Labour Party, but in his defence, it's a complicated situation, and Israel's just doing its best to defend itself. Only joking, it's a fucking genocide, you brain-dead arsewipe. You'd think a former human rights lawyer, a man that's literally argued to prove genocide at The Hague in 2014, would be able to look at the headline, Israeli strike kills at least 10 children queuing for medical treatment in Gaza, and at the very least think, ooh, those ones sound like the baddies, maybe we shouldn't be selling them guns and shit, you know? Also, isn't this the guy that pledged to review all UK arms sales? What, did he just miss the page with the fucking genocide on it? Here's a quote from him in 2014 in the fucking Hague, arguing that what was happening in Croatia at the hands of the Serbs met the legal definition of a genocide.
Serbian forces carried out a sustained campaign of shelling, systematic expulsion, denial of food, water, electricity, sanitation and medical treatment, bombing, burning, brutal killings and torture, which reduced the city to rubble and destroyed its Croat population. What the evidence before this court reveals is genocide.
Wow, that sure does sound applicable for another situation happening in the world right now, doesn't it? Human rights lawyer Sir Keir Starmer. But no, this gormless old cunt has managed to find the moral nuance when it comes to the war crimes committed by... you guessed it, a government that funnels money into lobbying groups in the UK that provides substantial donations to politicians in return for, you know, nothing at all in particular. The fact that Israel has provided funding for 180 MPs through opaque lobbying groups, and Labour Friends of Israel has spent over £150,000 sending Labour MPs on propaganda tours of Israel, and Labour accepted a £4 million donation, the largest donation ever received by the party, from Cayman Island-based Quadrature Capital, who holds shares in companies that make fighter jets and bombs for Israel. Well, I'm sure this was all just by the by and had no impact at all on their decision to continue to sell arms to a state that is committing a, say it with me now, genocide. For people who place the genocide as their number one issue, this obviously was enough to write Starmer off from the get-go. But between the anti-APAC movement in America, APAC being the Israeli lobbying group in the US, and a return to an emphasis on a more domestically focused politics, it's quickly becoming an issue of increasing importance for the average person too. Even if you don't see Israel-Palestine as your key issue, seeing the amount of influence another government's lobbying has on your country would alarm anybody. In July 2025, Keir became the very picture of strength and decisiveness, as he threatened to acknowledge Palestine as a state by September if Israel didn't stop, you know, genociding them. Not that it was genocide or whatever, but if they don't stop repeatedly starving and murdering innocent people, he was gonna... you know, he was going to be miffed. It's just not cricket, is it? September came round, and Israel made no moves to agree a ceasefire, never mind a process to finding lasting peace, so Keir switches his webcam on and announces that the UK formally recognises Palestine as a state. While this doesn't necessarily mean that we'll be imminently withdrawing all support from Israel, it does show that he's slowly being forced by his own MPs to shift his stance. Pair that with the Labour Party voting to recognise the findings of the United Nations Commission of Inquiry that there is indeed a genocide happening in Gaza, and we're seeing Keir's interests diverge in real time. On the one hand, he's the leader of the Labour Party, who seem to almost unanimously be opposed to Israel outside of the cabinet ministers that aren't allowed to have an opinion that aren't dictated by Starmer. Then you've got the fact that he's Netanyahu's part-time ball tickler, and he's being paid not an insubstantial amount of money to keep the drones well-oiled so they can continue to shoot more children as they seek aid. Keir has also decided that the protest group Palestine Action should be proscribed as a terrorist organisation for breaking into RAF Bryce Norton and spray painting aircraft. I know what you're thinking. Thank God Netanyahu stuck to genocide. If he spray painted a plane, he would have been arrested and branded as some sort of terrorist. All it took was a couple of years in politics to go from the guy that defended the Fairford Five to prescribing Palestine Action as a terrorist organisation for, like, the same thing. Good work, Keir. Glad to see you're putting that human rights law degree to good use, you absolute fucking cunt. Then we've got immigration. If there was ever an example of Keir utilising the kind of political strategy you could only communicate with flavoured fucking crayons, it's with this here. Let's just run the clock back for a second. We start off in his Harvey Birdman days, and he's a very typical pro-immigration left-wing kind of guy. He understands that the vast majority of migration is legal and perfectly reciprocal, and tackling illegal immigration is less about building walls across the beaches and more about diplomacy and establishing returns agreements with the countries that they come from. Then he becomes a politician and pledges to defend migrants' rights and build a system based on compassion and dignity. Then he becomes the Prime Minister, and all of a sudden he starts giving shout-outs to Enoch fucking Powell as he starts making speeches about us becoming an island of strangers. Now, to be fair and balanced, he did say that he regrets using that phrase and that his professional and qualified political speechwriters didn't know that it almost exactly echoed one of the most famous speeches about immigration ever made. The point is, he deeply regrets it, and we should all move on and pretend that the Labour leader didn't just say the thing also said by the guy who warned us about the rivers of blood that will follow the welcoming of migrants. In terms of policy, it's honestly just kind of confusing to me that he's decided to try and mishmash two completely opposed ideologies hoping to fix the problem. On the one hand, he's doing diplomatic work with our neighbours to establish a one-in, one-out system to help disincentivize taking the risk crossing the channel. On the other, he's saying that he's going to clamp down on the legal migration that we're relying on to prop up our public services. Then he cuts foreign aid by 40% so he can pour more money into defence spending. You know, for the war that we aren't in. Once again, Keir has just shown that despite all the commitments he made during the leadership contest and the election cycle, when push came to shove, he carried on doing the same thing that's been about as effective as Charlie Kirk's flak jacket. I honestly don't see what the big problem is with saying immigration isn't a problem. It's the increase in asylum claims that is a problem. It wasn't a problem until we left the fucking EU, by the way, so you can thank Nige and his mates for that one. But in the meantime, we're going to respect the human rights of asylum seekers. We will continue to process their claims. We will find the funds necessary to do this as quickly as possible. And our promise to you is that we will make sure that if a claim is rejected, the applicants will be deported in good time. We'll put more funding into aiding integration for asylum seekers, and we'll absolutely fuck the fucking fuck out of any asylum seeker or refugee that's found guilty of a violent or sexual crime. Understand that just because a problem presents itself now, it doesn't mean that the problem is caused by something happening now. The issues with asylum seeker numbers that we're seeing is directly related to Brexit. And even then, it would help for Keir to provide any sort of clarity with regards to the numbers on this as well. We spent about 0.17% of our GDP on asylum support last year. And fair enough, it could be lower. But if you voted for Brexit out of principle, frankly, I don't give a shit about your sudden concern for being fiscally responsible. You told us that the principle of being able to agree your own border policies was more important than the price that we would have to pay. You fucked around, and now it's time to find out, and I'm gutted for you. I really am. Okay. Before I finish up, let me just clarify. I don't think Keir Starmer is in the same realm of cuntishness as Boris Johnson or David Cameron. He isn't. At the end of the day, regardless of my overall disappointment, the NHS and other vital public services are receiving more money than they have for over a decade. Rail is slowly being moved over to public ownership. The Employment Rights Bill will improve rights of workers in the UK. These are good things. But at the same time, let's be honest. These are the exact things he was elected to do. The Labour Party exists to do these things. This is the party with a tradition of giving voice to workers and trade unions. Without the voices of the people Labour have historically championed, we wouldn't have had the welfare state, weekends off, nationalised public services, the abolition of the death penalty, equal pay, the minimum wage, maternity pay, the mass building of social homes. All of these things were done when we had every financial incentive in the world to not do those things. But we instead chose to tax the absolute richest in our society to help pay for them. Keir Starmer could do this. There's no shortage of money in this country to pay for things that we are asking for. He could overhaul our outdated tax system that taxes work more than it taxes wealth. Our system that sees economically active, full-time workers pour their monthly wage into the purses of vulturous landlords that exist solely to skim a profit at your expense. I mean, in a way, he's making my choice at the next election for me. The Conservatives fucked it from the get-go. Reform are a bunch of narcissistic multi-millionaires bought and paid for by Russia to cosplay as the working class so they can destroy the NHS and make being brown illegal. Labour have turned up to the metaphorical Hurricane Katrina with a dustpan and fucking brush. The Lib Dems are alright, but after the coalition I don't really trust them as a party. Your party, the party of love and tolerance, broke down into a heap of intolerance, accusations of sexism and legal threats before they could even think of their own fucking name. So it's the Greens then, ain't it? Zach Polanski's gonna have to sign me up big boy because he's now the fucking Luke Skywalker of UK politics. Keir needs to understand that his complete lack of willingness to do what's needed to make stark changes to working people's lives is the most fertile breeding ground for the kind of politics that Reform UK thrives in. He doesn't seem to realise that the best thing he can do for the country to inoculate it against reform isn't to write a boomer as fuck diss in the middle of his political conference speech. It's to actually do something for normal people that they can see and feel happening. It's to go back to the drawing board, recommit himself to the 10 pledges he made in his leadership bid, and just hope to the holiest of fucks that it wins voters back. But then, to be honest, even that feels out of reach. The truth is, Keir has already shown that he is unwilling to do what his own voters want of him. Unless a miracle happens and we see a real shift in thinking at the upcoming budget, the Labour Party is dead. And Keir will go down in history as the man that killed it. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please do like and subscribe. It really does help. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by joining as a member right here on YouTube or by becoming a patron in the description. You can join from just £1 a month. Speaking of, a huge thank you to my gorgeous, beautiful and tall supporters on Patreon and the members right here on YouTube. You guys really butter my mellows. Love you. Bye bye.